Okay, so let's get more concrete about how water matters to issues. Let's start with issues related to human security. We'll get to conflict in a second. Um, Access to clean water is a crucial development goal. A lot of human health is predicated on access to clean water. The one of the Millennium Goals, 7C, was to have by 2015 the proportion of the population without sustainable, safe drinking water and basic sanitation. That having was met 5 years early, and between 1990 and 2015, 2.6 billion people gained access to improved drinking water sources from 76 to 91%. Though, of course, you have to be clear about improved drinking water sources. What does improved actually mean in that? And 663 million people still have a lack of access to clean water sources. The Millennium Goals were replaced after the Millennium Goals deadline of 2015 with the Sustainable Development Goals, moved from a more ambitious goal from having the number of people without to eliminating those without access to clean water and sanitation for all. So that's a Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Unfortunately, that still has not occurred, even 5 years later. And there's an estimate, according to these the one United Nations report, that by 2050, at least 1 in 4 people is likely to live in a country affected by chronic or recurring shortages of fresh water. We're going to see in over the next couple weeks areas that have insufficient, dependable freshwater supplies. This is something I think that resonates with us here in Australia. Water scarcity affects 40% of the global population, and we are living in a time in which a lot of people are overdrawing the finite resources of fresh water in their areas. The Colorado River in California, a recent example, normally. The Colorado River normally flows into Baja California, but because of the amount of water taken out with population growth in Arizona, Nevada, and California, no water actually reached the Baja California coast because of excess demand. Water tables have been increasingly brought down by overuse, and so over 1.1.5 billion people are living in areas in which the use is exceeding the amount in which the system can recharge. That might work in the short term, but once those water resources are depleted, then other sources have to be secured that are likely to be more expensive and involve transport. About the same amount of people use a source of drinking water that's been fecally contaminated. Sanitation is a crucial health issue. Access to clean water and abilities to have sanitation systems that can take human waste away from areas of human production. Unfortunately, there's still a large amount of people who do that, and that leads to a lot of health issues, which we're going to talk about in a second. Almost 2.5 billion people lack access to these kind of basic sanitation services like toilets and latrines because you need a way to keep that separate from the water system. Um, and yeah, this last statistic kind of resonated with me growing up in Southern California. A lot of the wastewater and sanitation water is treated before it actually goes into the ocean, but there's a lot of surf, snorkeling, scuba diving that occurs in areas. Sometimes it's not safe because of some places becoming contaminated with human waste, and over 80% of wastewater from human activities, whether gray water or otherwise, are discharged without any pollution removal. So this involves a lot of not glamorous but crucial infrastructure to be able to allow people to do what we do, and to meet our needs for water without allowing those two systems to overlap in ways that can risk human health. Because of this cross contamination, fecal contamination, daily, almost 1,000 children die to diarrheal diseases. Over 2 million people around the world every year die from these preventable diseases because of the lack of access to clean sanitation and fresh water. The difficulty, of course, is these infrastructure projects require functioning institutions, budgets to keep them up. In the Central Asian example that we're going to look at videos later on in this class, you can see that it might be well and good to create the systems initially, but it takes time, effort, and money to maintain these essential sanitary services over time. Hydropower is the most widely used renewable source of energy. I'm sure this is likely to change pretty soon with the growth in solar power. But in 2011, it was 16% of global electricity production. This is possible in certain areas in which you do have the geological elevation gains that make this kind of power production feasible. But by and large, the most of the water that's generated is used for irrigation for agricultural production. And of course, the farther up you eat on the food chain, the more intensive the water usage is for each individual calorie. We're going to look at natural disasters in a few weeks. But yeah, as I mentioned in the intro, the vast majority of natural disasters do involve water-related deaths. And there's other estimates from the UN about what these costs are as a way to try to make it resonate with overall economic production. A lot of time there's a lack of incentive to provide aid, access, and long-term investment in areas that are in the most need of these resources because it's difficult to do in the short term, but the long-term benefits, there's estimates that it can dramatically increase both human health and economic production. So whichever one I think is more interesting to you, there is these kind of direct effects. Not investing in water and sanitation costs over 4% of sub-Saharan African GDP. The vast majority of agricultural production in Africa is not irrigated. It's last time I checked, it was well over 90% of agricultural production does not use irrigation. So people are at the whims of having adequate water due to weather. And over 60% of India's GDP is lost to in the economic effects of inadequate sanitation. There's been efforts and a lot of improvements in these areas to increase access to sanitation services, but it is difficult to create in these places and create sustainable practices to be able to secure these resources over the long term. This, of course, is not a new problem, water-related issues. Again, it's one of those fundamental elements in human society, and it's going back to mythology and Noah. Here, a painting of Noah's Ark, in which you had too much water, basically wiping out all of human habitation so that the system could start anew. There's a lot of data sources on water conflicts. I included a couple of articles today that look at water-related conflict issues. And if this is a topic of interest to you, you can look at online resources. People have gathered data on water conflicts dating back all the way to 3000 BC when God punishes man with his 6-day storm. Border deaths, Tigris River first dammed over 3,600 years ago. So you can see in this map there's water-related issues no matter what area you're looking at. And you can look at specific border disputes if you're looking for case examples for your research paper. The data sets that the articles that we look at might not necessarily be as useful, but you can look at over 600 cases of conflicts going back as far as you can think of to tie it in to these water-related conflicts. To try to bring it home to me, I come from California, which was its economic growth was driven both by securing adequate water resources from areas where people weren't living to areas where they were living, as well as the 19th century gold rush. But the U.S. Definitely, the California definitely had its water wars. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the California water wars, but basically, with Southern California growing so dramatically in the end of the 19th and early 20th century, the the political powers that be were trying to secure water access to allow for greater growth. They found it farther north in the Owens Valley of Eastern California. The breadbasket of the West Coast is that Central Valley in California, and they created an aqueduct to try to bring water from the north and the east of the Southern California down to where people were moving, and the people who lived in these areas weren't too keen about it. So this is a Google map of where Owens Valley is. Beautiful hiking and mountains out in the Sierra Nevada, up around there. Death Valley, that's just where a new world heat record was set just a couple of weeks ago. But you can see that is a substantial distance from the Central Valley and Central California down to Southern California. And so what happened was they built this aqueduct to be able to move water from these areas that were agriculturally productive, but that not that many people were living there, down to Southern California, to LA County, San Diego, and areas that allowed it to grow so dramatically. And when you're driving on the 405 highway that goes the length of California, you can see the LA Aqueduct. This is one of the more dramatic ones in which they bring it over the hills leading over the Cajon Pass from San Bernardino down into Los Angeles. And my wife always makes fun of the LA River when we are in LA, because you do have flash floods and you have high amounts in these concrete basins of water, but the vast majority of the time it's just a trickle without the aqueduct bringing water dependably from Central California. This creation of the aqueduct and the California water wars. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Chinatown. I should have checked to see if it's on Netflix, but it's an excellent movie that is reminiscent of those times in which you had people that had a lot of money to gain from making sure there was adequate water, and the water haves and the have-nots. In 1924, some farmers tried to express their displeasure with the creation of the aqueduct by trying to destroy it. Also, another dam that wasn't made very well, the St. Francis Dam, wasn't made terribly well. When they do collapse, even in California in 1928, it ended up costing the lives of over 200 people. So you have the creation of this infrastructure in Los Angeles decades ago. Las Vegas had faced similar challenges as well, and one of the major limiting factors for long-term development in the American West, especially with climate change leading to the kind of heat and the fires that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, is making sure that you have adequate access to water in these areas. And this, like we saw with the light rail on the Northbourne corridor, when you have these infrastructure projects, there's dependable money to be made along these areas that are going to make it more economically productive. And so I think this is just a brief kind of mention about how water affects economic development and human development, and how these scarce resources can involve haves and have-nots. Owens Valley was basically the Owens Lake was pretty much dried up. After that lake was dried up, Mono Lake was targeted in California, and so you see this insatiable demand for water resources. I know Australia has had experiences with water rationing. California definitely had experiences with water rationing. There's been a big push to get rid of lawns in Los Angeles because of the water usage that they require. So it's connects to the mitigation and adaptation issues that we've touched on already in this class, and we're going to focus on later on. That you have a scarce resource that's essential for human life, and efforts are necessary to make sure that it's clean and to make sure where it is. And so that can lead to economic and political pressures that can lead to violence, even in places like California, not to mention other areas in which you have long-term border rivals like China and India, or small-scale conflicts, as we're going to see next week in the Sahel. So let's start talking about. Let's start about. Let's start about. I can't talk. Let's move on to talking about water conflicts.